Hi, I'm Jennifer Branch. I love sailing and I love painting sailboats. Here's a gorgeous sailboat from Southwest Harbor in Maine. Let's paint. I start out by reserving some white areas with my wax crayon. There's a lot of light shining on the sailboat, so it's great to just reserve that. Cobalt Blue is a nice cool blue for underneath, just the water ripples that show the sheen of the sky. So I move around the whole painting with the Cobalt Blue. I'm laying that dry, and I take the chance to dash in some Quinacridone Gold. I'm using a Squirrel brush because I want to just brush the surface of the paper. It's a cold press paper, so I want the deep, rich colors I can get with the slicker paper, but I still need that ripply, watery texture. And that's you get with the rough surface. So cold press is a happy medium for when you can't quite decide, which of those two things that you want. Some paintings are all about color or texture. Don't forget that you can use wax crayons after the initial wash, as long as it's dried. So I go in here now with some Quinacridone Gold, and I'm painting pretty carefully. I know it's odd for me, but I'm painting pretty carefully around the sailboat because I want the sailboat to stand out. I want it to be very well defined against the water. I'm going to go back and I'm going to blur some lines, and I'm also planning on using gouache in this, which means I don't have to worry about keeping the rigging white or anything like that. I never use gouache to the very end of a painting, though. It mixes with colors and turns the colors bad, but it looks great when you use it as a couple dashes. Notice how the Cobalt Blue has dried, and I'm just letting the colors flow together. Let the watercolor paint itself. You just let your brush dance and put on some good music, or if you're lucky enough to be actually where you're painting, which I definitely think is the best thing to do, then enjoy the atmosphere. I cannot tell you how many paintings I have painted in Southwest Harbor. It's just lovely. These old wooden sailboats, they have a couple builders of wooden sailboats up there, and they're amazing. Now I'm just skimming the surface. This is where I needed the rougher paper, so cold press paper on. And now I'm letting just color drop in because it's shiny on the surface. It's a reflection from the window behind. Now on a separate video, I'm going into why I zoomed in on it, why my first painting of this did not turn out, and I'm going to show you why and show you how to build a composition, because that's the hardest and part of the most interesting part of paintings. Now after I've let it dry, since I want these the water isn't all flowing, I'm flowing it into each other, but I'm having some reserved areas on each layer. So in between each layer, I need it to dry completely. Now I'm wanting it fairly dark, and it's fairly flat, not much water sparkle right around the sailboat in the back, which is great. I definitely want the sailboat to stand out, like I said, and I can always blur it a little bit later. And I am reserving the white of the sailboat. There's a lot of things that look great going back in painting in gouache, and doing a couple dashes of reflections would be fine. But for the bulk of the sailboat, to get that translucent, shimmery quality, you're not going to get that with gouache. You need to reserve the white of the paper for that. So I take my time and I don't paint anywhere I don't want to paint. It's a lot easier to say that, right? And I'm still using the squirrel hair brush. It just touches the surface of the paper, and that's all you need. Now, I started out painting around the buoy, but it just was, it wasn't quite working. So I wanted a little bit more layers on that. A little bit more reflection, and it doesn't need to stand out. It's the boat that's important. This area between the bow of the boat and the buoy is very, very dark, and it's a critical area to have a lot of contrast in. That's where my center of interest is. That's where I want all that detail to be. So I need kind of a dark, dull area right next to it. I'm pulling in the color from the shadows from the background. It's always a good idea to use what you have around you, to what's around the object, to pull into the shadows. Shadows are reflections. They're not all gray. I like using a wax crayon throughout the painting on something like this, because this way I don't have to worry about reserving the cobalt blue. I just dash some wax lines over it, and that's that. It dulls the color very slightly, but for the chalky white of blue of the reflection, perfect. That's what I want. Now it's starting to look like a boat, right? A little bit of movement in the ripples. Just keep slowly moving around. Take your time. So I like it to get a little bit warmer here. A little bit more color. Remember, Pthalo Blue is extremely staining, so anywhere you put it, you want it, because you're not going to be able to change it very easily. It's a lovely warm blue. When you use a color one area in a painting, make sure that you use it in at least 2 other places. Otherwise, it's going to look isolated and your painting will look, it won't flow. Just dash the horizontal lines in. All the ripples in this case are horizontal, so that's pretty easy. This is a very simple painting, but sometimes simple paintings can be the most effective and the hardest, really. Nice horizontal lines, leaving plenty of ripples. But remember, the outside of it, I want to be dark, surrounding light. So I do need a little bit of dark down here, and I need a little bit of dark, keeping the masked reflection from pulling the viewer's eye out of the painting. Just a couple lines there makes all the difference. See how that keeps your eye It's focusing it, pulling it in. So a couple strong darks flowing in the water. Just continue laying those horizontal lines, flow into the wet paint. Wet into wet is perfect for water. You want those reflections, and just keep in mind the direction of the water, because the water isn't always horizontal lines. Reflections always come directly towards you, but it's easier when ripples are horizontal directly towards you, but that doesn't happen very often, really. It really depends on the wind and waves. Quinacridone Gold is perfect for the rich wood of the sailboat. I'm letting the shadows form themselves, really, by having the paint from the water flow into the sailboat. A little bit more gold. The Quinacridone Gold here is a little bit tricky because I don't want everything to turn green. It really is blue water and some green shadows, highlights on it, and I want to make sure it stays that way. Always remember to look at what you're painting. Just let your painting dry completely and notice how colors change as you let them dry. Here's the fun part. I love doing the ripples on the boats. Water just reflects on there, and it creates all these interesting little dashes and darts and oval shapes, and it's really fun to paint. It'll blur some from the surrounding area even if you've let it dry. Just dash the color around and let it flow. Remember, you're talking about water reflections, so it's going to reflect the colors around it. There isn't a set formula. You can use purples or yellows. I usually start with a warm color and flow the cooler colors into it, but it really depends on the situation. Notice that these shadows on the sailboat, on the underside of the hull, are you can see them a whole lot more on the reflection rather than the actual sailboat. So keep that in mind, that it's not a mirror image even if it looks like a mirror. It's usually a little darker, a little cooler. Now after that's dried, I can do a second layer, increase those shadows there. Just pulling the paint right into the boat. And letting the colors flow together and just dash around. Let your brush dance. Have fun. Just pick the colors around. Now after that's dried, I can do another layer. So these white things where you're wanting to do a lot of reflections and colors and stuff, lots of layers. Let it dry. A little bit more dark just to give it the real shape of the boat. Now I'm going back with the rigger and just putting a few details in. I start out with some Quin Gold. I don't want the mask to pull me out of the painting, remember, so just a few dashes around. A little bit of color, not too much. As great as this boat is, this painting's not about detail. It's about the water and reflections in the boat. Now at the very final stage, I use gouache. I don't want gouache to mix with my transparent watercolors because it would turn them muddy. I would lose the whole point of the painting. So I usually smudge gouache out a little bit. That's a quick little trick. That way it looks not quite so painted. More part of the painting. So dashing that around a bit and just pulling out some highlights. It doesn't all have to be drawn in. And then I like pulling out something like the rigging with the X-Acto blade. Please be very careful with the X-Acto blade. Don't destroy your painting or your hands. I hope you've enjoyed this video and it's inspired you to go paint some sailboats this weekend. Always look at what you're painting and really enjoy the process. This is fun. There's some more painting videos on this video and a lot of other ones on my website, paintingwatercolor.com. Happy painting!